Christoffer friends, welcome back to Opus Elenae, where we are back on our embroidery bullshit. I love sewing, don't get me wrong. I love how quickly a project can come together and the accomplishment of making something fairly large. But there's just something about working on a tiny fiddly embroidery project that soothes my meticulous brain. And then I'm good for like another year before I start itching for more. My local SCA group has a set of Baronial Cloaks worn by our leaders with the coats of arms of everyone who has held those positions since the forming of the group. About 9 years ago, I embroidered 2 pairs of shields for the then current and past sets of leaders. And now it's time to do it again. You know the drill. Everyone grab your cuppa. Today I am drinking Plum Deluxe Tea's Toasted Marshmallow Blend. It's a decaf black tea with marshmallow root and flowers, vanilla and safflower. It's a warm, comforting tea, and I love that it's caffeine-free as much as any decaf tea can be. But I do wish that it had a little bit more smokiness to go with the toasty sweetness of the marshmallow. Next time I make it, I'm going to add a pinch of Lapsang Souchong, a tea that is smoke-dried, to see if it gives me that campfire taste I'm looking for. Let's get into it. These are the Baronial Cloaks. Almost a decade ago, our then Baron and Baroness asked me if I would remake the old ones, which were made from a polyester jacquard and were both showing their age and dreadfully hot to wear. So I made new half-circle cloaks out of linen and transferred all of the applique and embroidered bits to those, including the 4 shields that I made. And since nobody had jumped on the embroidery train in the intervening years, when our newest Baron and Baroness stepped up, they asked if I would be willing to play catch-up and embroider the last 3 pairs of shields. Of course I said yes. Somewhere along the way, I lost track of the heater shield template I used, so I had to make a new one by tracing one of the patches I originally made. No big deal. Next, I grabbed a scrap of linen and cut a rectangle, drawing threads to make sure it's completely on grain. This is pretty important. When stretching fabric for embroidery, you don't want any bias stretch or the whole design will be wonky when you take it off the frame. I like to give my ground fabric a quick press with starch just to make sure everything stays nice and square while I'm stretching it. Linen especially is notorious for wanting to slip off grain, and we can't have that. I'll reinforce the edges of the rectangle by sewing a simple folded hem all the way around. You can do stuff like adding bias binding, but I think that's a bit overkill. I just want a little sturdier edge that isn't going to unravel or pull when I stretch the fabric. I'm going to section out the linen by folding it in half and then thirds to create 6 cells, each of which will have a coat of arms inside, which I will draw in with my template and trusty friction pen. I'm going to transfer the designs before I stretch the linen for a couple of reasons, so that the design is drawn on relaxed fabric and also because I don't want to have to deal with tracing around the frame. Could I print out all of the shield designs and pull out my light box to trace them onto the fabric? Yes, but why do that when I can just skip the middleman and use my iPad as a light box instead? Obviously, this doesn't work well for a bigger design, but it's perfectly adequate for smaller things like this. time to stretch the linen. I'm using one of my TF Woodcraft slate frames, which I love so much I have bought them in multiple sizes. I cannot recommend the quality and customer service highly enough. I will never buy my frames anywhere else. I'm sewing the short sides of the linen to the side rails, making sure that the stitches are equidistant for even tension. Then I will stretch the fabric tight and add the pins to the stretcher bars to keep it taut. I could then sew the longer sides to the stretcher bars, but I decided to use twill tape and pins instead. It's super easy to adjust if necessary. Now I can prep my thread. I'm using DMC Cotton 6-strand embroidery thread because it's not super delicate, they're easy to obtain and match, and they're generally fairly light fast. I've pre-cut lengths of thread about 15 inches, 38 centimeters long, and I'm braiding them loosely. It's easy to pull a single strand at a time, which I prefer anyway, and it keeps all the threads contained and untangled. Time to actually start embroidering. You'll see me using a couple of different frame stands in this process, and I'll link them both in the description, but I do have a preference. This first one has a clamp to hold the project. I think it would work better with a hoop or other light frame, but it struggled with the heavier slate frame. Later in the video, you'll see that I switched to a stand that holds the frame from the bottom like a music stand, and that was a lot more sturdy and secure. There are two big struggles in these kinds of projects. The details are so tiny and the fields of color are so large. For outlines and details, I'm using a combination of stem and split stitches. I find that they give me a lot of control over where the thread lays. For the larger fields of color, I'm using several different kinds of stitches to create visual interest. I'm using a Bayeux stitch, which is a kind of laid and couch technique. The area is filled or laid with long satin stitches, which then have long perpendicular stitches laid over them at intervals, and those are tied or couched down with tiny stitches, keeping all of the thread in place. There's a technique in medieval manuscript painting called diapering, where a large space was filled with a small repeating pattern. Our modern diapers call back to that because the waffle woven cloth used before disposables became a thing resembled those painted patterns. I'm using different directional stitches to create geometric diapering pattern on a couple of these shields. I'll often create stitching guides on the fabric to make sure I'm staying on target. In this case, the otter has lines to make sure that the split stitch fill has a directionality that mimics fur. All of the animals have similar directionally filled areas. And the background has wavy lines that will be guides for a diapering effect created by rows of vertical satin stitch. The background fill for this shield is formed from long and short stitch, which is exactly what it sounds like, a series of overlapping long and short stitches that make a smooth ground with no hard lines. This final shield has a background that is another laden couch stitch, this time with a lattice of tying stitches instead of just parallel lines like the Bayeux stitch. In order to keep them properly spaced while stitching around the foreground elements, I'm using a hem gauge as a guide. Each lattice stitch will be secured where they cross and then ermine spots stitched inside the resulting diamonds. Also, this shield has my first successful French knots ever, and I'm very proud of them. Thank you to all of my current and continuing Ko-fi members. I cannot stress how much the support of all of my croissants makes it easier to do what I do and provide quality content for all of my viewers. Thank you all so much. Stick around after this brief commercial break to see me apply the shields to the cloaks. There's something really satisfying about taking an embroidered piece off the frame, even if it's not the end of the project. Maybe it's because the embroidery phase is by far the longest part. I think I put about 30 hours into just stitching. I'm cutting out all of the shields, leaving about a 1/2 inch border around the embroidery so that I can turn it under for a clean edge. It's not really a project until you're doing last-minute sewing in the car on the way to the event while your partner sings sea shanties, right? Luckily, attaching the shields with a felling stitch is super simple, and it was done well before we arrived.
Alright. He was like, ow! Let's get her this way, baby. Okay. She is matched. It looks right. Okay. Oh my goodness, you look so good. I love the waves you did on it. Oh my gosh. You did amazing.
So good.
So cute.
I'm glad you like them.
Oh my gosh.
So this one
Yeah.
is Helena's.
Uh-huh.
Obviously that one is yours. Gavin's and Kelly's.
Look at the detail on these.
I'm very pleased with how the dress came out.
Yeah, no, I was
This is by hand?
Yes, all by hand.
This is absolutely beautiful.
I didn't make from here up. From here down, I made a little.
you know, to just be able to actually list off. Oh, who's that one? Be like,
I don't know. Yeah, I know from here
they're
down.
number 3.
Very number.
I took it into work, so I was working on these. Like, I had it on the slate frame, and I had them all. And my friend's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Okay, contact." And I
Do
was
you
like,
have 30 minutes?
Thanks for joining me today. I really enjoyed doing this project, and I'd forgotten how much I like playing around with different stitches to create visual interest in large areas of solid color. Since I'm on an embroidery roll, maybe I should get back to my Sabriel surcoat project. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell if you feel like taking your chances with notifications. If you want to find me on social media, I am at Opus Elenae everywhere, but the place you can find me most reliably is my Discord. If you're interested in sewing, history, or just a wonderfully supportive community, come join us at the link in the description. Until next time, be kind, do the work, continue supporting marginalized people, and keep creating. Hwyl.